And this episode of Archipiélago Histórico is brought to you by Tabaco La Altura, making Puerto Rican puros. For those of you that don't know what a puro is, it's basically a cigar whose tobacco leaves are all grown in the same place. In this case, we're talking about tobacco leaves grown in Lares, Puerto Rico, in the mountains. So if you are a person like me who is always looking for authentic taste and experiences, consider Tabaco La Altura. For more information, look Tabaco La Altura on Facebook or at Tabaco La Altura on Instagram. Remember that tobacco consumption must be responsible and considerate with your health. Thank you, Tabaco La Altura, for sponsoring this episode of Archipiélago Histórico. Hello, welcome everyone to this episode of Archipiélago Histórico. In this episode, I will be having a conversation with Dr. Marlene Daut. Is Daut correct?
Daut, yes.
All right. Okay. So we'll be talking about a fascinating topic today, and that is the intellectual history of the Haitian Revolution. Now, it is very important for me to do this because, again, this is a podcast about Caribbean history. And there seems to be an awful lot of simplifications when it comes to the Haitian Revolution. I was one of those people who oversimplified this very complex process called the Haitian Revolution. To me, in the past, it was just, oh yeah, well, it was Toussaint Louverture. He gathered an army, fought the French in Saint Domingue, and they became the nation of Haiti. But no, so much more complex than that. So to clarify those things, we're gonna have a conversation today with Dr. Daut. So Dr. Daut, for those of for the people in my audience that aren't familiar with your works, can you tell us more about yourself and the things you're interested in?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me here, first of all. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So I trained as a literary critic in kind of intellectual history. So I do work on literature, properly speaking, but a lot of my work for a long time is on pamphlets, abolitionist pamphlets, anti-slavery pamphlets, pseudoscientific treatises about race in the 18th and 19th century, that sort of thing. I teach French and African American studies right now at Yale University, and very excited to be able to talk about this topic, the intellectual history of the Haitian Revolution, since a lot of people tend to think that it's quite simple. It's just an anti-slavery revolution that ends in independence. But of course, as you mentioned, very complex and different ideas and sometimes competing notions happening there.
As I was reading the book, I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know this occurred this way, or wow, okay, so there's something called the Hommes de Couleur, if I'm pronouncing that right, which were black free men who were also participating in the institution of slavery, and a lot of oftentimes were also victims of prejudice against them by the French colonists, and it was there's a lot of contradictions and a lot of confusion, and I don't know, maybe you will help us go through this very complex process today. But I want to start with when I read the first chapter, within the first paragraphs you start attacking the notion of the Taino, and I was like, yes, because that's something I've been trying to do myself here. A lot of times people we try to pigeonhole this group of indigenous people that were present in the Caribbean, and we call them the Taino. And in fact, they were not the Taino. It's just a lot of different ethnicities
Mm-hmm.
who were cohabitating these spaces in this region, but they weren't a homogeneous group of people that we today still call the Taino, and that is something that archaeologists have been trying to fight as well. Can you tell us about more about that?
Yes, I'm so glad you opened that way because to me also, I teach a class called Modern Caribbean History, and I teach Modern Caribbean Cultural Studies as well. And we
Mm,
start with the Caribbean before Columbus, the book, the Keegan and Hoffman book, two archaeologists, in which they really strongly make this case that, like you, this has been sort of a bee in my bonnet, so to speak, for a number of years, because anthropologists and archaeologists have been saying that this is not the correct terminology to use, that these are European invented terms for one thing. And the other thing is that we're taking groups of people who lived across wide spans of geography and collapsing them because it's easier to do so, not because it's more historically accurate or because it provides a richer historical and cultural understanding. And, this really, I just finished my colleague Ned Blackhawk's book about Native American history as sort of the foundation and to really understanding U.S. history, not as a side note, not as something that's additive. And he, in the
right.
beginning of that book, has a beautiful map of the United States and all the different groups broken
Oh.
down by, you can see the states that would be the states today that they would be in. And how can we imagine that the entire Caribbean archipelago, South America, are all Tainos and Arawaks and Caribs, Carib being the most problematic of all those terms?
Hmm.
It's not possible, and it doesn't show the kind of respect that most of us are going for when we bring in pre-Columbus history. It's because we want to honor that history and show respect for it, that it's not just anything that happened after Columbus is important. But that starts with, what did the people in these regions call themselves? And if we don't know that, it's, I think, okay to say we don't know. Even though we know the five main principalities, for example, of the island of Haiti, La Española, renamed by the Spanish crown, of course, we
Hmm.
actually, did they refer to themselves as Zaragoans? I don't know, but I think that it is better than saying Taino and Arawak, or cacique, which just means leader. But a lot of people, I know in Spanish it's cacique, think that that's an ethnic term when it really just speaks to the person who was in charge.
Yeah, you bring forth a very important argument here. Just because we don't know what they actually call themselves doesn't mean we should be still calling them Taino. It just doesn't work that way. Let's just say we don't know, be honest about it, and just we should be able to just accept the fact that there was a wide variety of ethnicities spread across this vast region, and that's it. I mean, uh, just because we don't actually have a name for some of these people doesn't mean we should still be using wrong names for them. I've heard about the
Exactly.
Kalinagos people too.
Yes, because then we would never accept, or in the Garifuna, for example, that
Uh huh.
wherever there are still robust communities, it seems like the kind of blanket terms haven't necessarily dominated. And I think that that's also true because in what is now, of course, the United States, we still have strong communities from people who, whether they are, right, because you could say Cherokee, but there's actually different Cherokees, right? And Ned
Oh
Blackhawk's
yeah.
book, really, the map really shows you that the different names people had, or the Sioux. It's not just the Sioux. There's the Mitawakan Sioux. There's other groups that are under that umbrella as well. And I think that, sometimes scholars now like to talk about the myth of Caribbean kind of genocide in terms of the complete eradication of the native population. And even though that is also not entirely accurate, there is, in the case of Haiti, La Española, I would not want to say that Native American genocide, Native Caribbean genocide is a myth. I would want to say that we need to understand it more fully, because in the 18th century kind of état civil, the civil registers, there are occasionally, you see enslaved Indiens, they call them enslaved Indians, being kind of bought or sold or getting baptized or getting married or being freed or, something like that. But it is a really small amount. And when Haitian authors of the 19th century and other scholars afterwards talk about the disappearance of this native population, they mean the community. They don't mean that there was never any mixture in the blood and people going into DNA and saying that. That's not what they mean. They say, look around, and this beautiful civilization, a remarkable people who were living on their own terms is gone. And so we have a lot of, in terms of the indigenous period, quote unquote, a lot of re-education to do and a lot of learning, even me, all of us, to do, because what we've been taught is a kind of simplified narrative.
Yes, the extermination narrative, that is so problematic because, as you say, even though there is the disappearance of a community that is, that you can really see that there are indigenous, there is a disappearance of their community and their way of life, but they themselves do not disappear. They move on, they live on via mixture with other people and so on. So this is a very problematic notion, that of the extermination of the native people of the Caribbean. So something else that I really like that you mentioned in the book, you talk about the case of Enrique, or Henry, which is one of the first people who rebelled against the Spanish crown was in the 16th century. What can you tell us about this very interesting individual?
Yes. So I've been interested in Enrique, called Enriquillo sometimes, and the Haitians call him Henri, for a while, because principally the 19th, 18th, and 19th century Haitian intellectuals, who are kind of the focus of the book in a certain sense, in that I want them to tell the story of the Haitian Revolution and what would that look like from their perspective, and what notions would we gather and understand more fully. And so even though we say, well, how can the revolt and rebellion of Enrique in 1519, what does that have to tell us about the Haitian Revolution? But what matters, of course, is the meaning that Haitians derived for it and the Haitian revolutionaries derived from it. And the meaning they derived from it was that revolt and rebellion has always existed on this island, that anytime we compromise with authority, what I call in the book constituted power, that it's not going to lead to actual freedom, even though it might lead to emancipation. And that's what happens with the case of Enrique. He signs this quote unquote peace agreement, or in modern parlance, we call it a Maroon Treaty, but it was a peace agreement in its era, in which it was, you don't attack us, we don't attack you, you can go into these mountains here and live apart. But of course, the Spanish are actually not super interested in having him live apart in this way, because where do they get supplies from down into the cities that the Spanish are creating? And there's this constant threat, the example of it that the Spanish don't want to spread. And so around 1533, the Spanish authorities start to try to figure out, how can we eradicate this kind of maroon settlement, the most prominent, largest one at the time? And they send some soldiers and officials after him. And what ends up happening from the Haitian perspective, from the scholars who've studied it in 19th century Haiti, who are still some of the only scholars, some of the only sources we have, said, maybe Enrique, they don't blame him, which I found so interesting, because in modern scholarship, there is a lot of, Enrique signed this treaty. He gave the formerly enslaved Africans, he turned them over. He agreed to give any back who might kind of come and try to join his settlement. And the Haitians said, Enrique was tired. 14 years of this, 15 years of this, he knew that he couldn't win. And I felt like, it's not even apologist. It's just simply the reality, because we're also dealing with writers who are experiencing this, who understand what that defeat feels like when you see yourself outgunned, really, when you see how much can you continue to go forward. And one of the things I say in the book is, when these are people who've been whipped and beaten and chased and enslaved, it's just a completely different perspective that we have to kind of think about. So Enrique has kind of interestingly got a bad rap in certain ways in in modern scholarship, but in 19th century Haitian scholarship, he's a hero. In 19th century Haitian poetry, in novels, he is an absolute hero, a flawed one because all heroes are human beings also first. And I found that very interesting.
Yes. You know, he's attacked because in the end he pretty much crumbled.
Yeah.
Because of this pressure that the Spaniards were putting on him. But you really have to understand the context. And to me, via your book, it seems that you put forth a series of arguments that lead us to understand better his motivation. So if you put if you're in the shoes of this guy, you're gonna be like a couple decades or 14 years, as you say. There's nothing else I can do other than try to preserve as much as possible my sovereignty here. So I'm completely surrounded. There's nothing else I can do. So if I can hold on to a little bit of sovereignty and give this small settlement even a couple more years of peace, and if that means I need to compromise somehow with the Spaniards and return other Maroons and cooperate with them, so be it. Because in the end, I know that we're only a couple of years away from complete domination. So it's a very difficult predicament. And it's very easy to simplify that with, oh yeah, he should have fought until the very end. Well, that would have meant probably the end of your settlement in a couple months instead of a couple more years of peace for your people. And it's a very complex process that you need to understand from all sides.
Yeah.
You mentioned something very interesting as well that I'd like to touch on. So you're saying, so something I find a little problematic from my you're saying that in the book that the Haitians found ways to become the new indigenous population of Haiti. Does that mean that they actually thought they were indigenous people, or it's more of a spiritual link to these ancient Haitians?
Yes, it's more of a spiritual link. In fact, so of course, the Haitian revolutionaries under Dessalines call themselves the Armée Indigène, the indigenous army. And then we see the Hommes de Couleur, whom you mentioned earlier. They believe they're the rightful inheritors of this earth. And we watch as Charles Erard Dumel, in his voyage to the north of Haiti from 1824, say, if we could go back and ask the Haitians, ask the indigenous population, which of the groups, the, independent Haitians now or the French colonists, they think should be the people who live on this land, what do you think they'll say? And that's when, you see that kind of metaphor, that vate metaphor of the awakening the ashes that Haitians call forth over and over again, not simply as a kind of, a fancy sort of literary technique. They're saying, let us imagine and think about it. And if this earth doesn't speak to you, the colonists, do you think that it doesn't speak to the rest of us? And I think that moment when Daguin is in the kind of colonial assembly and he's talking to the colonists and he's saying, you say you're people of God, but, do you know who God, do you know what God is? Do you know what God is? But do you think that this is what God wants? And I used to think that it was so interesting that 19th century Haitian authors did not talk about religion the way that 19th century African American, especially free Blacks in the United States, talk about God and religion. And then I realized, it's a sort of more global spiritual God. It's not, I'm Episcopalian, I'm a Protestant, I'm a Methodist, I'm a Catholic. It's this more global notion of, there's a creator up there. And do you think that any creator would want this one group of people to completely destroy the other group of people? And so the Haitians kind of take that as a spiritual principle and say, we must be the new indigenous of this land. And we must fight for it in the name of, isn't it so interesting that Dessalines changes the name back? That's the first thing they do. They say that's their honoring of, I can't think of a better way to honor the former people of that land. It's actually quite moving to think that
Oh yeah.
even in 1804, they have no idea. There's no Black History Month. There's no Native American History Month. And they say, no, this is what we're going to do because they know this history and they don't need any of the Europeans to tell them about. They're living legacies of it.
So Ajiti means land of mountains, correct?
Yes, mountainous populated land.
Ah, okay, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds great. So yeah, this is the first thing they do after they become a free nation, and it's very, very touching, as you said. And you know what? A couple months back, I told someone I think that the Haitian Revolution is the single most important revolution on this side of the world. Let's not talk about the American Revolution because it doesn't matter how you feel about it. At the end of the day, it's just about a bunch of disgruntled colonists who didn't want to pay more taxes. I'm sorry to say it that way, but that's what it is. Whereas you have the Haitian Revolution, which is not only a freedom, a revolution for freedom, but for emancipation. And there was so much more at stake than having to pay more taxes. This was a matter of life and death, running away from torture, from horrific institutions like slavery. There is so much more at stake than just having to keep, I don't know, pay more taxes to King George or whoever. Despite the great achievements of the American Revolution, which it did have some great achievements, to me, the Haitian Revolution is the single most important revolution on this side of the world. Something else I'd like to mention is you opened the book by talking about someone very important, and pardon my pronunciation, I don't know any French. Trulot?
Oh, Trujillo.
Is it?
Yeah.
So he he published the first book about Haitian history in Creole. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. So this book by Michel Wolfe-Trujillo, who is most famous for his book Silencing the Past, Power in the Production of History from 1995. But earlier in the late 1970s, 1977, it came out, he published the first, what's considered kind of the first full-length history of Haiti, written in Haitian Creole, so not for school children, not for just a kind of general history. And it was called Tidi Fait Bouler sous Histoire Haïti. And as I talk about in the book, there's different translations, but I say, most literally, we could think about it as burning debates in Haitian history. It's recently been translated and published in English as Stirring the Pot of Haitian History, because there's a kind of instigator, the guide I talk about, who's meant to pose questions to his interlocutor about Haitian history. And the book is remarkable because, unlike Silencing the Past, which most people associate with the history of the Haitian Revolution, even though you're not going to get a kind of full play-by-play of the Haitian Revolution, nor are you going to even get necessarily an understanding of its main actors. What you get from Silencing the Past is an understanding, a very important and field-defining understanding of the power relations involved in the fact that, as we're talking about here today, has been alluded to, that most people actually don't know the Haitian Revolution is the most important revolution on this side of the world. If you asked them, they might say the French Revolution, they might say the American Revolution, they might say any number of other revolutions, but Haitian Revolution would not be top of their mind, even though it's responsible for all the freedoms, or I would say the most vital freedom we take for granted today. The freedom not to be enslaved. Haitians, as I mentioned in the book, coined the term for slavery as a crime against humanity. The French don't do it until the Loi Taubira, the Taubira law in 2001. Yet I read an article published in Le Monde, in the biggest French newspaper, from June of this year, in which the author opens by saying that France was the first nation to declare slavery and the slave trade crimes against humanity. So here we are in 2023, and France believes that 2001 was the first time that any nation thought slavery was a crime against humanity. And so Trujillo's books have been incredibly formative to bring this dynamic, to push it to light. Many scholars are really, if you could be a Foucauldian or a Derridian or something, they are Trujilloans. They are operating from the place of not let's repeat that argument over and over again, but let's show what we're missing when we don't understand the Haitian Revolution in its full complexity. But at the same time, as silencing the past has this kind of ascendancy in the US Academy in particular, I understand that it's never been published in French, which I find is very interesting. Sidi Feboulé, Trujillo's first book, is his least known, probably. Most scholars, if they've heard that name, most people in the general public, if they've heard the name at all, know Silencing the Past. Or his later book, Haiti, State Against Nation, which is also deals with a later period, but extremely important. But Sidi Feboulé sur Haiti is a history of the Haitian Revolution that poses it as that series of questions and answers, not as just a foregone conclusion and where you're hitting somebody over the head with the argument. Instead, wondering about it, just kind of as you said at the outset, oh, this revolution is filled with contradictions. How do we understand other Black people owning Black people? How are we to understand that in the context of the Haitian Revolution, not as just a fact of slavery, but wait, what does that have? Oh, and it's not, they didn't just join the side of the enslaved. Oh, they didn't just join the side of the colonists and the French, that there were splinters and factions and that everything was a process. And so, one of the most influential parts of that book for me is in Haitian Creole, the phrase that Trujillo sort of uses in one of the chapters, which is, Cousin, est-ce que c'est ça liberté? Is this real liberty? And then he says, Pou qui sa m'pa ka gen liberté? Why can I not have liberty? That this is what the formerly enslaved, the laborers, said, not under the French colonists, but under Toussaint Louverture. And that is these nuanced understandings of the revolutionary leaders, as much as the revolution itself, are necessary because we are not writing hagiographies. This is not propaganda. It's not publicity. We are interested in the world historical significance of this event and it's in its full complexity.
What you said about France sort of denominating itself as the first, or it's kind of baffling, isn't it?
It's scandalous. It's actually scandalous.
It's as if the sense of superiority never ends for them. Something I want to touch on that's very important. Over and over again, I've heard the following argument, that the French slavery institution was more horrific than any other one. Now, before we proceed, let's understand that all forms of slavery are horrific. But I want to know why the French slavery institution is known to be like on a higher level when it comes to how terrible and horrific it was. Can you give us an example that back up that claim that the French were the most terrible slavers back in the day, actually?
Well, first I will say I would not necessarily say they do have that reputation of being the most horrific enslavers, but I don't necessarily agree with that. So the phrase that I use in the book is they practice institute some of the cruelest slave punishments in the Atlantic world, not necessarily the cruelest. And as you mentioned, all slavery is cruel. And the only reason I want to begin my answer with that caveat is that I'm a specialist on French slavery and U.S. slavery, and to a lesser extent, Spanish slavery as pertains to the side of the island that is now the Dominican Republic. And slavery is ubiquitous and practiced across to the Atlantic world, or, the tortures of it are instituted across the Atlantic world. And what an individual enslaver does is always violent, is always horrific, is always torturous, right? The French, here's the problem the French have. They love documentation. They believe themselves the progenitors of enlightenment, the cradle of civilization and science and humanity and all of these things. So they document every single thing that they do. The Spanish and Portuguese also document what they do, but the French love to publicize what they do, right? So we're the first nation to declare, slavery a crime against humanity, which is not true. And then they don't say what is the truth, which is they're the only nation in the entire world to have ever brought back, abolished slavery and reinstituted it. That's their actual first. And so that cruelty also, so they reinstitute slavery in Guadeloupe, allow it to continue in Martinique in 1802. It's not abolished until 1848, goes into effect
Wow.
1849. 46, 47 long years of more torture for the people on these islands. And I would say the other thing that leads to their reputation of cruelty is they send, people to study. They send a man named Hilaire de Berteuil to study how to make the island more profitable. If you can imagine, it's the most profitable sugar colony in the world, but because they're losing so many people every year, the life expectancy for an enslaved person born on the island is 15 or 16 years old. For an enslaved person forcibly transported there from Africa, 2 to 3 years. So you've got this incredibly young population. They constantly have to keep forcibly transporting more Africans onto the island. I have the chart showing 900,000. And at the time, from 1697 to the time of the Haitian Revolution, 1791, the French alone forcibly transport 900,000 captive Africans to the island. At the time of the revolution, there's 450 to 500,000 captive Africans in the slavery, so slaves. And that is also including the number of people who were born there. So what happened to all these souls? What happened to all these souls? And Baron de Vate, our most kind of meticulous chronicler, because he came from a family of enslavers, was a free man of color, and witnessed it. He wrote this expose, The Colonial System Unveiled, about his neighbors, essentially. When you go through the colonial records and you look at his family's plantation on a map, the people he calls out in The Colonial System Unveiled are his neighbors. They're mostly from the north. And he describes what areas they're from. And if you were to take out a map and look at the map of the plantations, these are people he knew. And then the other thing is the French have all these fugitive slave notices. And so they create these notices because they want to get the fugitives back. They want them to be captured. But they also unwittingly chronicle all the horrible things they've done to them, all the diseases these people have suffered under their care, under their torture, under their, rule. They say so-and-so has a nabo on his foot. A nabo is kind of like this chain that they would put on an enslaved person to keep them from running away. They'd say a collar around the neck that's dug in and created all these. They talked about it. And so I would say that the one of the reasons for their reputation is them themselves chronicling everything, as I say, like they went into a crime scene and they're the perpetrator, but meticulously chronicled all the things, that they did in the course of this crime and put it in a place called archives and act like it's innocuous because it's in the past.
So reading your book, throughout the book, it seems to me that the French had a fascination with a couple of punishments: burning people, cutting their heads, putting them in pikes, and something called the wheel. What is the wheel?
Oh, I'm so sorry to all your listeners, but the wheel is just that. It's kind of it's not a crucifixion, but you kind of lay the person out and they whip them and crack them and beat them. And as you mentioned, if you read the book from the Vincent Auger and Chavannes punishment, probably one of the most detailed that we have, you're supposed to do this until they die. You leave them there. And as long as it pleases God to keep them alive. That's why I say, think about how the French colonists talk about their God. Their God is that it pleases God. Not even it suffers God. It pleases God. Like this would be something that would please any God. But that's their conception of the world. And after that, we're going to cut off their heads, put them on pikes, one on the road to Dondon, because that's where he's from, and the other one in Grande Rivière, Chavannes, because that's where he's from. And this is meant to act as a warning. And they had done this to Makandal. They threw him into the fire, and they had done this to Boukman. They wanted his head.
Wait. No, you're talking about very important people here that I want to. So Makandal is very, very interesting for me. If I recall correctly, he's the one behind the so-called poisonings, right?
Yes.
So what is going on with these? Because it seems to me that there were a lot of poisonings, but at the same time, some of these weren't actually poisonings. So what's going on there?
Okay, so Francois Makandal was an enslaved man in the Lambaye region, and he was enslaved by a man named Le Normand de Mézy. So this is kind of a famous name in Haitian revolutionary studies, Makandal and Le Normand de Mézy. And so throughout the 1750s, there are supposedly all these poisonings in that region of Lambaye where Makandal is being forced to live. He's also a fugitive and run away, so he's being blamed for all of these things. When the colonists capture him, they put him on trial and they bring all these supposed witnesses. Makandal is probably what we would describe today as a hungon, a voodoo priest or a person who leads a kind of voodoo ceremony. And so he's been making these packets. And in the packets that, the historians call fetishes or fetiche, but in these packets supposedly are phosphorific elements from nature, locks of people's hair, babies' breath. I mean, just all of these things. The Europeans are the ones who record this. So if I sound like I don't believe it, it's simply because it's filtered through their very, as you see it from the book, paranoid mindset of anything they don't understand is like wicked and witchcraft. And they call him a sorcerer at the time. And in fact, that's what they put on his sign that they make him wear after they've convicted him. So in January of 1758, they decide, with all these testimonies, supposedly of his conspirators, who are also in jail, and they keep interrogating them, the French, over and over, basically until the people say what they want. So oh yeah, sure, he's poisoning lots of people. When the reality is, as a new book by John Garrigus is, I think, going to strongly show, it's called A Secret Among the Blacks. The reality is they were dying from disease. There was anthrax poisoning. There was yellow fever. Obviously, there were arsenic in the water. There was all kinds of epidemic disease, smallpox, things that still kill to this day. And that probably the majority of those people were dying from those diseases. And that Makandal, the historians have concluded, probably never poisoned anybody. Yet the French colonists they said, we're going to burn him at the stake. So in Haitian oral history, Makandal does not get burned at the stake. He transforms himself into a mosquito and flies away. But the thing is, when you look into the story, first of all, when Makandal was arrested, he told the authorities, you can't kill me. I'll just take on a different life form. And I find that so revolutionary, because what I say Makandal's rebellion, his rebellion is against the system of death of French colonialism. Like, you can't kill me because you cannot kill my soul. You can't enslave my soul. And that's why he was a maroon and a fugitive, living in the mountains. And so when they throw him into the fire, he jumps out of the fire. So he's on fire and he jumps out. And the officials are so afraid of him that they tell all the, kind of owners, the enslavers, to take the people they've enslaved away so they can't see it. And they execute him. But the enslaved are like, see, you can't kill him. And as much as the colonists tried to convince them afterwards, no, we really did kill him, they didn't allow any of the enslaved people to witness the execution that was supposed to deter them from wanting to rebel. And so then you see after that if rebellions and poisonings happened after Makandal, the French create them. They start trying to arrest anybody, accuse them of all manner of crimes on flimsy evidence. And this is another one of those things. Salem witch trials. No, let's go back to 18th century Saint-Domingue. Look at this. They literally put these people on trial, forced them to give this testimony, and then twist it in all manner of forms. And the number of people they executed and jailed is just astounding, on a simple suspicion, on a simple whim. And so then that was the sort of famous impetus, that name after that. It's the name of a dance. Anybody who took that name, because the name is actually given to the person who is the kind of ungan. So it's a sort of general name. It's not actually necessarily his name. It's the name that the other enslaved adherents gave to him for his spiritual following. So other people had that name, and anyone with that name it just terrified the French authorities. They created all these phantoms and ghosts. I say they awaken the ashes themselves constantly. They terrify themselves with their kind of crazy, evil machinations, and their imaginations about what the people they are enslaving might do to them in retribution.
Who coined the term racism?
So Charles Hérard Dumel in Voyage to the North of Haiti from 1824. I want to stress that because if you look in the Oxford English Dictionary, you're going to get dates from the 1830s. If you go in the French case, you're going to be in the 1890s, Spanish case, the 1880s. And he says that the French are sailing here, Dumel says this, on the sea of ultra racism. And you know what is interesting is you noticed in the book, I'm very interested in how people mark up books. And in a copy I just examined of the 1824 edition of Hérard Dumel's book, who knows whenever somebody wrote this there, somebody wrote 3 exclamation points after, underlined it and 3 exclamation points because whoever it was probably knew that that term supposedly didn't exist in the era. And it's because all evidence at the moment points to Dumel having created this terminology, the same way that Just John Lott in 1807 coins slavery as a crime de lèse-humanité, a crime against humanity. Vatte picks it up in 1816. And there's so many moments like that that I found in Haitian intellectual history that I really, it is not because I want Haitians to be first. But, what I've said is, isn't it interesting, though, that when French are first at something that they're not even first at, or the United States is first, everyone has to know now being first is important. But if I say, Hérard Dumel coined the term racism, what does it matter? What being first doesn't matter. That's like Columbusing. It's like, it never matters when people of color do it. It's never important. And yet you can be a journalist for Le Monde with all their fact checking and say something that's just blatantly and demonstrably false. And also just nonsensical. 2001, the Nuremberg Charter in 1945, after the Holocaust, also declared slavery a crime against humanity. So, what is this business about being first?
Yeah.
When it's so easily proven to be false,
You mentioned in the book that the Haitian people were the first one to be enslaved and the first one to rebelled. But there is a sort of rebellion before the revolution that took place in 1740, if I recall correctly, and it was by Ogué, if I recall correctly. Can you tell us more about that smaller, let's say, rebellion that was before the revolution?
Yes. Okay. So Ogué is 1790. The Ogué rebellion is in 1790, and it's a rebellion, entre guillemets, or in quotation marks, as we say, because it's ambiguous. But just as with Makandal, it doesn't. So we could go the sort of social scientist empirical route and say, was Makandal actually rebelling? Like we could try to unfold that, right? Which is not the purpose of my book, is to unfold whether or not he was. It's what it meant in Haitian thought. Just as, with Anna Kaona and Kaonabo before them, it's what it means in Haitian thought. And so the Ogué rebellion in Haitian thought is a rebellion. It's a rebellion against colonial authority. The Haitian thinkers definitely know that he was not arguing for immediate emancipation of the enslaved population, but the execution that he suffers for leading this very small rebellion, whose goal, of free men of color only, whose goal is to force the French to implement a March 1790 law that says that free men of color have equal rights of representation with the white colonists. His punishment for trying to force them to impose this law that came down from France, from the French National Assembly, is to be broken on the wheel, as you mentioned, along with Chavan and about 20 of their supporters. They had fled to the eastern side of the island, which was on Spanish rule, but the Spanish governor, the Dominican governor, if you will, Santo Domingo, it was called, sends them back. They're extradited. And in February of 1791, they're broken on the wheel. Then their heads are cut off and put on pikes to warn other people. So in Haitian thought, the enslaved people seeing 2 free men of color's heads on pikes in a region, northern sort of moving down towards Grand Rivière, region that already is known for rebellions. I mentioned Makandal was burned there. It already has this reputation that the enslaved themselves, Toussaint Louverture mentions it in his famous speeches, take this as a sign that the revolution that they must bring about is inevitable, and that because they are the ones who are going to take care of it. But I also want to mention that in 1521, I talk about the Christmas time rebellion, which were enslaved Africans who revolt from a plantation owned by Diego Colon, Christopher Columbus's son, who was governor of the colony at the time. And they rebel against him because Haitians don't talk about it as much. But Émile No, who I mentioned in the book, the author of the Histoire des Caciques from the 1850s, who's also our best source on Enrique from the Haitian side, he talks about, he alludes to this rebellion as well. And later Haitian scholars allude to this earlier Christmas time rebellion, not to say that it directly influenced them, but to say that there's this long string and long tissue. And so the idea that the Haitian Revolution was inspired by the French Revolution is not correct. That there was a long history, and that it was only, in the words of Alfred Lemoule, in their hearts and their minds, that the enslaved people, Africans of Haiti, of Saint-Domingue, found the motives and methods for their revolution. It was in their spirit. It was in Makandal. It was in Auger. It was in the Christmas Time Rebellion. It was in Enrique. Like, you can't kill all of that. You can kill those people, but you can't kill that memory. And we see that strongly, that 300 years after the Christmas Time Rebellion, No is referencing it. That you can't take it out of cultural memory. You can get rid of all those enslaved Africans who suffered punishment of death for rebelling against Diego Colon, but you can't kill the memory of what they did.
So you mentioned in the book something very important. You talk about the homme de couleur. Again, I don't know French. I'm doing my best here. So you mentioned Louis, I don't remember his number, Louis something from the 17th century. He promulgates that the homme de couleur will have the same rights, providing that they have certain criteria met. I don't know, having white family or something. What is the origin of the idea of the homme de couleur, and how is it, and why is it? I mean, not why, because we know it's very contradictory that they are essentially black people who enslave other black people, but just expand on that, because it's very confusing and it's very contradictory.
Yes. Okay. So all the Louis, you're right to be, I have friends and my students are also like, I can't keep the Louis straight. You're going to just have to, just tell me what they did. I can't keep the Louis straight. So of course the French, we're talking about French kings here. And so, slavery is first established. The French first begin to play a role in Atlantic world slavery under Louis the 13th. It's under Louis the 14th that the Edict of 1685, which we know now as the Code Noir, but the Code Noir is later. But many of the provisions are the same. So if people call it the Code Noir, that's fine. But in the book, I did want to be precise, because the Haitians are precise when they talk about it, that this Edict of 1685, which is the initial rules, yes, it allows for brutality under cover of saying, here are the things you can and cannot do. But it also allows these terrible slave punishments that we were talking about. And punishments in quotation marks, right? Because it's like, you ran away, so I cut your foot off. It's like, well, of course they ran away, or 50 whips of the lash or whatever for being insolent. Well, of course they're insolent. The French are insolent towards them, So this edict comes down and it says, isn't it interesting? First, Jews are expelled from the colonies. So just to complete the picture of racism and prejudice that's one of its first orders of business. The next provisions later are that white men can marry women, African women they are enslaving, if they convert them to Catholicism. And then it says what happens if they don't. What happens to the women if they don't? What happens to the man if they don't? But this is really important in Haitian thought, because that's the origin of all the hommes de couleur. So the hommes de couleur are originally men of mixed race, white and African, white European, white French and African, or sometimes white Spanish and African, depending on where the person came from, where the colonists came from, but mostly in that part of the island, white French and African, West African. And then they have children. And those children, because the mother's now free, because the Edict of 1685 also establishes the womb law for Saint-Domingue, follow the condition of the mother. And then when those children have children, so now we're going to go into the 18th century, when those children have children and those children have children, they'll be free. And so a racial terminology crops up to describe, that's how we get mulatto, quadroon, octoroon, all these definitions for these intermixtures, even though they're, of course, never as pure as just that. So that population inherits slavery, not the condition, but the fact of being enslavers from their white fathers. And as time goes on, even from their mothers of mixed race, like Vaté, whose mother has a father named Pierre Dumas, who's one of the richest planters in Marmelade, in the sort of northern part of Haiti. And so this ends up being a complication for the revolution, because you have a group of people who are going to experience color prejudice at the hands of the white colonists, but who are also themselves colonists. So Julien Raymond calls, at first, you see, they're saying we're the American colonists. Isn't that interesting? In 1789 into the 1790s, we're the American colonists. Oh, it's only later, when that connotation begins to change and have a kind of more negative connotation to colonists, that we see that terminology fall away. And in the beginning, the free men of color are primarily interested in their own rights. Hardly any of them want slavery to immediately end. Those who do are more anti-slavery, like Julien Raymond, usually ended up living the majority of their lives in France. But even he, as we see, I would never has a historical figure perhaps disappointed me more, because, you want them to be better when you see their ideas, and why couldn't you take it to that next step? And he could only ever get to gradual emancipation in his mind. And he was never behind the revolution. He accepted the revolution once it happened, but he was never a proponent of it.
Yes. Even Louverture, to the dismay of many people, he wasn't talking about freedom from France. He was talking about emancipation, free and French.
Yeah.
So what we know as the Haitian Revolution didn't necessarily start as a movement to become independent from France. No, it was more about emancipation, but later it transformed and it became also a movement towards the freedom of the nation from France. What happens after the French Revolution? Because we're talking about égalité, fraternité, and what is the other one? There's just three.
You cut out for a second.
So no, it's fraternité, égalité.
Is that fraternité?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're having a lot of legal maneuvers from the French colonists, saying liberté, all that stuff, but that doesn't apply to Black people.
Yes.
So what's going on there?
Oh, has there ever been a bigger historical contradiction? Free and French, right? Because sometimes I say there's parts of the book that are kind of the Haitian history of the French Revolution, right? Because they say, let us think about it. Let us deconstruct this for a moment. So in 1789, the French decide that they're no longer interested in kind of absolutist monarchical rule. They create the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. And one of its most famous articles says that you have the right to liberty, security, and resistance from oppression, and among other things. And to the French, they're thinking, to the French colonists, this document is responsible for all the ills that, Auger's rebellion, for example, for slave revolts and rebellions, for the ensuing Haitian Revolution, when in fact that document from July of 1789 is used by the French colonists to say, no, these things only apply to white French people. And in order for them to continue to make this argument, because they have an illogic, but their logic is possessed with just enough rationality to know that if they say that the hommes de couleur libre are men, and they are French citizens, and this applies to them, then how would they justify continuing to enslave people? Would you have to say this mixture of blood, and they've tried some of these things in their laws before, but it is so illogical that the only thing the French colonists can do is to say no people of color at all with any African ancestry. And that's when Julien Raymond, the free man of color I keep mentioning, he kind of styled himself as the spokesperson for the rights of the free men of color, loses his mind, because he says if the French Revolution is about getting rid of feudalism, right? To say you're not a lord and a duke because your parents were, and because your parents were, and because your parents were, then they're saying that is a feudal state. Clement says, if I have any African ancestors at all, then these rights don't apply to me, then you've created a kind of racial feudalism that I can never, ever get away from, no matter how white my skin might be. And, he stresses my father and my grandfather and all my grandfathers were white. Isn't that interesting? He goes on the paternal line, but he doesn't say anything about the mother because he is stressing his whiteness. Now, later Haitian revolutionaries who are in similar circumstances as he is, are going to stress their Africanness and their blackness because they want to create a rapprochement with the formerly enslaved population, because that is also, there's complications there about who's supposed to lead the new nation forward, who's supposed to lead the revolution and the rebellion forward. And so it's very interesting to watch as those what would be considered kind of their nuanced understandings of who are enslavers and who are the enslaved, but also to see that they have an immediate effect on the revolution and how it ends up moving forward.
Okay, so this is for the audience. Did you know that the first people to articulate a movement for the independence of Saint-Domingue were white colonists? So let's talk more about that, because these were, it wasn't the slaves, it wasn't the Africans, it wasn't the hommes de couleur, it was the white colonists who first articulated, we want out of the French Republic. We want nothing to do with this. We just want to keep slavery, enslaving people, and keep plantating and being rich here in the Caribbean. That's all we want.
And the reason for that, again, is so much illogic throughout this time period, but possessed, again, with just enough rationality to see that you can't say the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and Citizen and then continue on with slavery in perpetuity. Because already you had the pamphlets of Raymond, you had Auger's Revolts and Rebellion. On August 1791, you have wide-scale slave revolt and rebellion breaking out. Now the French colonists and French authorities are negotiating with Biassou and Jean-François and Boukman until they kill him, and other leaders of the slave revolt and rebellion, right? So the white French colonists cook up this idea of how to save the colony, which always means to save slavery, to keep slavery intact. We'll become independent, like who? The American colonists, the British North American colonists. And I want to stress this because Nicole Hannah-Jones got so much crap for saying that the American Revolution was in part about preserving slavery. And even though I don't necessarily want to wade into that debate here, because I don't think it matters in this, because what matters is how it appears in Haitian thought. And in Haitian thought, the French colonists, because that's what they said, wanted to be like the North American colonists, break away from their mother country so they could keep slavery. So I'm saying in the era, there were many people who read it that way and wanted to emulate it, not for the freedoms and democracy it sets up. Absolutely the opposite. The white French colonists do not want a republic. They want the opposite of a republic. They want royalism to continue. But because it's a particular context, unlike with King George III and the British North American colonists, the best way to preserve slavery for them in their minds is to go back to the kings who instituted it. The Bourbon kings who made it happen. Louis XIII, as I mentioned, Louis XIV, etc. That's the best way. And so yet most people think that independence was always this liberatory thing, even on the U.S. side. And what the 1619 Project showed is there's a blip here in this narrative because it doesn't make sense. If it was really all about liberation, which is what I point out in the book, the American colonists could have ended slavery. 1789, 1790, they're ratifying their constitution. The French did it in 1793 and 1794. We're not that far. It was not an outlandish, crazy idea. It was Vermont, the state of Vermont, as it's reaching statehood, is putting in measures for we're going to be a free state. It was not a crazy idea. They didn't do it because they didn't want to do it. And so to follow in that vein, the white French colonists of Saint-Domingue had an independence movement that was crushed by the French state, and with the help of the hommes de couleur, who, back to the free and French problem, don't want to be free of France. They want to be free of the white French colonists. And those are different things in their minds at the time.
Right. I want to make a comment because earlier you mentioned the wheel and how these people who were punished or executed were being executed until God wanted them to be tortured or whatever. Now, keep that in mind, because there has been a lot of demonizing of the religion of voodoo.
Oh, yeah.
Would you be a Christian if your ancestors died because the Christian God wanted them to suffer so much? It doesn't make any sense. So I want to touch that because and even from the Dominican Republic side, voodoo has been so demonized. These people believe in the devil and so on. Can you tell us more about what voodoo actually is?
So in Vodou, there's a bonje.
Uh-huh.
Bonje, I talk to a lot of scholars of religion like Louis Clomeus and Liza McAllister because I'm not an expert on Vodou and I want to understand more and more always.
Yes.
And the bonje of Vodou is the bonje of everyone. So the white god is a false god. The white French god, the one they're praying to, who likes for people to suffer, who wants slavery to continue, is a false god. So as you mentioned, it isn't even about why would I follow Catholicism? Why would I follow you? You are the prophets of slavery. You're not the prophets of freedom. You aren't priests preaching freedom and absolution and salvation. You're preaching by subjugation. And so they say bonje is the one God, the true God, and he wants freedom for everyone. So as you mentioned, the white French colonists and later other people, other actors, including in the Dominican Republic and the United States, where they call it voodoo, of course, right? Instead of vaudou, turn it around and say they want to kill all the white people. They hate white people. The French are constantly involved in these perversions where they think that because they think a certain way, that the people they're doing that to must think the same way, but with respect to them. So if we want to kill them and enslave them, if they get into power, they will want to kill and enslave us. And isn't it interesting to see that over and over the revolutionaries say, no, we want to share this earth with you. Toussaint Louverture, you could either think that he was weak, or you could think he was too much of a compromiser. You could think he'd made mistakes or he was naive, but he constantly said, we'll share this earth with you. We'll share the profits from free labor, free hands with you. But you can't kill us. You can't hold prejudices against us. You can't say that we don't have the same rights. And it's the same thing, I think, in the religious realm. The Vodou religion is a religion of liberation. It says, we can share this earth with you, but you can't subjugate us this way. And when the question came back to the Haitian revolutionaries, like the Baron de Vathey, who is, Henri Christophe, first and last king of Haiti's most prominent secretary later in the 19th century, but in the 18th century, a free man of color, child of color, born to a white father and a woman of color, fights in the revolution, first on behalf of the French colonists, and then with the armée indigène, as he's very clear about. And he says, we could have all continued on. We could have been free and French, but who came along? We could have shared religious fruits. We could have done. Who came along was the destroyer, Napoleon Bonaparte, who doesn't want to share the earth with anybody, gets himself excommunicated by the Pope from the Catholic Church. Even they don't want him. Even they reject him. And so the Vodou religion is really about saying, as per the Bois Caïman ceremony, etc., that if we had to use violence to get what we want, it's the violence of getting rid of the false gods and our destroyers. And so that's what Vathey says in one of his later works, where he basically says, can you really blame us for using violence? It's like the Fanonian argument before there was Fanon. Like, colonialism is violence, pure and simple, and it will only yield when confronted with greater violence. And that is perhaps one of the most uncomfortable truths in a world that tended to exalt the quote-unquote peaceful abolitions of the Great Britain and the United States, which were not peaceful, obviously. Baptist War, the Civil War, all of these things. That the emancipation happened in a legal room does not mean that it was peaceful, that the process that brought it about.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I have nothing against that idea at all. And yeah, nothing to add. So now with Vodou out of the way, there is an important ceremony by Boukman. what's going on there in the
Yes.
northern province of Haiti?
Yes. Okay. So in the northern province of Haiti, in an area called Montrouge, and this ceremony, there's two different ceremonies technically. So we call it the Bois Caïman ceremony, but what we understand now are that there are two different ceremonies. So there's a planning
Yes.
ceremony around August 14th in Montrouge, and then there's a later ceremony in these kind of woods called Caïman that happens about a week later or so. And that is where it's at Montrouge, that earlier ceremony, August 14th, heralded as the Bois Caïman ceremony. And I'm fine with that because the terminology is important for sort of understanding the sequence, but not necessarily for what happens after it, because what happens after it is, at Bois Caïman or the Montrouge Assembly, Makandal, who's believed to have been born in Jamaica, he gives this speech to a crowd of representatives who've been sent from different plantations because the planning has been going along for a while. And he basically says, the God of the white man calls us to commit crimes. The God of the black man wants good works from us. We need to band together and we need to get our freedom, and then we can promulgate those good works. And so the reason that when, I was answering the question about Vodou, I didn't talk about the loi and the spirits is because I want to remain in historical context. And at that particular ceremony, no, there is no mention in any of the records we have of any of the other lois. So we have Papa Legba, Dambala, Ezili, etc. And those are modern Vodou, which is probably, according to the scholars, related to these earlier spiritual practices. But even calling it Vodou, Louis Cormeus and others have pointed out, is a little bit anachronistic, but it's okay in the sense of because it helps us to understand, kind of what we are to learn. And what we are to learn from this ceremony is that the God of Vodou, the God of the black man, is the true God, as I mentioned. And so about 10 days after that ceremony, the August 14th ceremony, the Haitian Revolution begins. And so some place it there were some smaller conflagrations before that, starting as early as August 21st. So I say the third week of August, but the 22nd, and then the big one, the 23rd, the night leading from August 23rd to the 24th, the revolution breaks out. And Boukman is one of the early leaders of the revolution. And for that reason, the French colonists and French authorities put a bounty on his head. And a man named Michel brings the head to the Colonial Assembly. And it supposedly has this sign on it. And they describe it in very lugubrious terms, the way his face looked. And they're very happy. And he gets this huge sum of money for doing this. But luckily for the revolutionaries, they are not deterred by this. In fact, just like with Auger and Chavannes, it's often the punishment, quote unquote, the execution that makes that propels the revolution forward. And so Jean-François Biassou, Toussaint Louverture, other leaders take the helm. And as we've been discussing, they initially tried to negotiate with French authorities, with French colonial authorities, but the authorities are so adamant that they will never give rights to the free people of color that, including these revolutionaries who've de facto freed themselves because they're not going back to slavery. Some of them, Biassou and Jean-François, are willing to compromise a little bit, in the vein of Enrique. But Toussaint Louverture is no. And the other problem they have is the enslaved from the Northern Plain are in open rebellion and it is spreading fast. And those individuals have no intention of going back to slavery. So even as the leaders are sometimes open to compromise, the mass population, which those leaders acknowledge in their letters to the authorities, they say, we are not going to be able to force them. It will take a long war to force them. Here's some compromises we can put in place in the meantime. And the French colonial authorities we don't negotiate with Black people. We don't negotiate with former enslaved people, like absolutely not. And so in Haitian thought, they're the ones who make the Haitian Revolution, the French colonial authorities, as big as it gets because they're so wedded to white supremacy. It blinds them to everything else, to every manner of reality and compromise and any other way forward, and made essentially the Haitian Revolution inevitable and its war for freedom and independence.
There you go, people. Okay, so you mentioned in the book that a lot of negative things have been said about Toussaint Louverture to kind of tarnish his reputation because of his negotiating attitude. and you push back on that. What is your ultimate assessment on the figure and legacy of Toussaint Louverture? Because one of the things people criticize so much is because after the revolution, he installed or put a new system that basically obliged people to stay bounded to the land and agricultural labor. So, what can you tell us about that difficult, complex figure that is Toussaint Louverture?
Yes, I mean, I think I call it, this is difficult freedom, right? Because it's freedom that doesn't look like freedom to the people who'd previously been enslaved. And I should mention that Toussaint Louverture was among those people who'd previously been enslaved. So he definitely understands the difference between freedom and slavery. Yet free labor and forced labor and enslaved labor, in those three realms, there's much complication, slippage, ambiguity. And at first, he seems to be a proponent of the free hands thesis, which Saint-Onax, who is the French civil commissioner who comes to the island in comes to the island in 1792 to enforce French laws, and ends up abolishing slavery in August 1793 because he has no choice. He abolishes it for the Northern Plain. His compatriot and fellow commissioner, Poverel, abolishes it in the South and West, regions he had control over at that point. And they had promulgated themselves as the kind of founders of liberty for the enslaved population on the island. Toussaint Louverture is the rival of this idea, and he has a rival himself as well, a man named André Rigaud, and Julien Raymond, who I mentioned. There's a lot of people who think that they're the author of liberty on this island. But Toussaint Louverture is the one we're concerned with because he is the one who becomes Governor General of the colony for life. His council gives him that title, and he takes it. And in that process, he makes a lot of labor laws. And those labor laws, really wanted to point out in the book, were not labor laws that came from his brain organically. Those laws were from Saint-Onax and Poverel's labor laws, from French Commissioner Théodore Edouville, a French agent also sent to the island later to kind of regulate things, who ends up making things worse, and Julien Raymond, who, as I mentioned, can't ever get to, he can only ever go so far in his thinking about freedom. And then we see Toussaint Louverture adopt some of these same policies, namely the one that really leads to unrest is that laborers, which is the new name they have, cultivators, cultivateurs and cultivatrices, or farmers, so farmers, laborers, farm workers, have to stay on the plantation where they're employed. And you can see why that would be a problem. And that also everybody has to be engaged in useful work. And the phrase that stuck with me as I was kind of studying this was, the state of domesticity is not useful, by which he meant like a woman staying at home to raise children or keep a house is not what we're talking. Like everyone has to be engaged in a money-making enterprise. And so when people say, oh, capitalism is no, capitalism and slavery go hand in hand together. And the reason why capitalism persists, even when slavery goes away, is because it is bound up in this idea of work and how much work is worth. And as soon as we got away from the idea that people were the biggest product of worth in work, and that it was actually what they created, we see that in Louverture, as they move away, they aren't quite there yet. It is, you must stay here. Here's the punishment if you don't stay here. We can force you to go in the army as well. That this is not a liberty to move about and do as one pleases. It would say what one wants. We see very clearly in the Constitution, there's the 1801 Constitution for French Saint-Domingue, ratified by Louverture, that there's not freedom of the press, that there's censorship. There's you can only practice Catholicism in public. So trying to sort of outlaw or criminalize Vodou in public to a certain extent, that this is difficult freedom. But rather than demonizing Louverture, I take my cue from the 19th century Haitians, who are the principal storytellers and narrators. They are explaining him. And that is so different from condemning necessarily, even though there are certainly things we could condemn about his rule, but to say, let us understand how this emerged so that we can understand how we got to the place where they were living then, whether it was under President Boyer, who signed the indemnity, or King Henri Christophe, or President Pétion, who ruled simultaneously with Christophe, or Dessalines, the founder of independent Haiti.
Okay, when do the revolutionaries effectively kick out the French out of the island?
So November of 1803, I always say the Battle of Vertières from November 17th and 18th, 1803 should be as widely known as the Battle of Yorktown or the Battle of Austerlitz or Waterloo or something, right? These big famous battles, but because it's so consequential. Now the French aren't definitively kicked out, as you know. They still are on the other side of the island, because that is something else that a lot of people don't necessarily acknowledge, is that as we have an independent Haiti on the western side of Haiti, or La Española, the former La Española, we have Santo Domingo in the eastern side, which is not under Spanish rule at that moment, but French rule, where it will remain until the Reconquista, as it's called, of Santo Domingo, which is from 1809, really around 1808, when Jean-Louis Ferrand, the French general in charge of that part of the island, commits suicide because he knows it's sunk, his cause is sunk. Was really when Spanish control sort of kind of materializes more, but officially in 1809. And so this is a problem for independent Haiti. They've technically kicked the French out in November of 1803, yet think about it. There were French colonists who lived there, and they weren't necessarily a part of the army. So now their choice is to leave and go become refugees in the United States or Cuba, Jamaica, or go back to France, which many did, or to try to stay
or the
there
United States.
Or the United States, yes, or stay there and live there. And so some at first try to stay there and live there. So that's the only reason I'm sort of hemming and hawing about when do they kick the French out, because you could say, some people might say they never fully kicked the French out, because as you see in the later chapters, Henri Christophe and other rulers are adamant that, or other sort of members of his administration, I should say, that as long as the French language remains with this dominance, that the French are still there. So even though after 1809, they are now mostly out of the eastern side of the island, mostly out of the western side of the island, they're still there. And after 1825, with the French indemnity, now they're there linguistically, economically, religiously, because the Catholic Church, and these are French priests for the most part, who had been living on the island and were the ones in charge of the churches. And so it's remarkable to think that, and to consider that even to this day, with French being one of the official languages of Haiti alongside Haitian Creole, but Haitian Creole did not become an official language until 1987, that the French are still there in some ways.
Oh, yeah. No, and the first history book on the Haitian Revolution in Creole was published in the 20th century. I mean, these, as you're saying, you can argue that these people are somehow still there. What happened with Napoleon? Because I know there's a character known as Leclerc, who is invading and stuff.
Yes. So, as I mentioned, after Poverel and Sontonax do this kind of, they're forced to abolish slavery, the French National Convention, remember, the French have already executed their king. Now they've set up a republic. The French National Convention declares slavery abolished across all French territories, which is remarkable. If they had continued on that path, they would be the first. Yet Napoleon came along, and he made it his mission to restore slavery. So he helps overthrow the Directory government, which had replaced the Jacobins. In 1799, they overthrow that, create this consulate. So he becomes the first consul. And under his rule, he sends his brother-in-law, General Leclerc, along with another general whose name is hated to all Haitians, General Rochambeau, the son of a Frenchman named Rochambeau, who fought in the American Revolutionary War, to the island to reinstate slavery and get rid of l'ouverture. So in those instructions, those secret instructions, you're going to get rid of l'ouverture. You're going to pretend to be nice to Dessalines and Christophe and all the other leaders, Moïse, who was Toussaint Louverture's nephew. You're going to pretend to be nice to them all. And then when you have them firmly in your grasp, boom, you're going to bring down the hammer and you're going to get rid of them. You're going to give them the option to go be deported to some island or to go to France, but they can't stay on the island. And then you're going to reinstate slavery in phases among the quote unquote laboring population. Of course, the Haitian people, the future Haitian people, have now been free of slavery, many of them now since 1791, some before that, because remember there's marronage, but in de facto since 1793. So the idea, again, the logic that they're just going to say, okay, sure, fine. Because it's not Guadeloupe. This is the land of the revolution. Guadeloupe had revolts and rebellions, but benefited from the Haitian Revolution in the sense that the French National Convention abolishes slavery there. And Laurent Dubas' book, A Colony of Citizens, is really good for understanding the process of how reinstating slavery was successful, or unfortunately, on that island. But things unfold very differently in Saint-Domingue. Leclerc and Rochambeau bring a genocidal operation. They decide that the only way to reinstate slavery is probably to get rid of, in Leclerc's words, anyone who's ever worn an epaulette, the French uniform, or a military uniform, and any child over the age of 12. Even the members of the general public are repeating this nonsense, are saying and encouraging this genocidal imaginings, I call it. But the Haitian revolutionaries fight back. So some of them initially seem like they defect to the side of the French, believe those promises that's smoke and mirrors of we're not going to bring back slavery and all of these things. But it's really, the process goes pretty quickly from 1802 to 1803, when the revolutionaries have figured out that the French are really going to try to bring back slavery. They form the Armée Indigène under Dessalines. They unite. They've been splintered into factions. They unite. And they decide to get rid of Leclerc has since died of yellow fever. Rochambeau is in charge now. He brings dogs, sends dogs after the Haitian. There's all these drownings of people of color. It is a really horrific period of history, but the French do not succeed, and they are forced to sign a treaty of evacuation with Dessalines. And it's after that, on November 29th, that we get a preliminary declaration of independence. November 29th, 1803, and then the official January 1st version that changes the name of the island to Haiti, back to Haiti from Saint-Domingue, which is something that the November 29th version did not do.
Wow. Okay. A lot of people think that Louverture died of old age, and in fact, it is a very sad story. What happened to Saint Louverture in the end of his life?
Oh, I mean, it's terrible. I mean, and he wasn't that old, right? He's in his 50s at most, his late 50s. So, Toussaint, or 60s, Toussaint Louverture was arrested. So he went home, actually. He fought the French for a while after some of his key generals, including Dessalines and Christophe, appeared to defect to the French side momentarily. He said, you know what, I will retire. He went back home to his plantations, but the French knew that he was just this big threat. They accused him of all these things, that just his existence there, right? Because of what he symbolized, the revolution and the end of slavery, that there was no way to bring back slavery while he was still there. Also because he was adamantly against it and he would have fought them tooth and nail. So they trick him into a meeting in June of 1802, a horrible general named General Brunet, and summarily arrest him, go back and arrest his wife, his children, his 105-year-old godfather, deport them all to France, separate them. The letters from the time period are so heart-wrenching because he's, wants news about his son. He wants to hear from his wife. His son wants news from him and from his mother, and they're trying to figure out what's happened. The French send this general, another terrible general, Caffarelli, who had also served in Saint-Domingue, to interrogate Louverture, get him to reveal all his plots. What Louverture does instead is write down what's known as his memoirs. And there's 4 different versions. And he had initially with him a kind of servant or, a waiting man who was someone who was in that role when they were in Saint-Domingue, named Mars Plaisir, who writes down and takes dictation for him. For some of them, some are in Louverture's own hands, but the one that's most official is the one that Mars Plaisir dictated. Toussaint Louverture tries to defend himself. He tries to tell Caffarelli he didn't do all of the things he's accused of. He wants to be free in French, that he just wanted, to be a good Republican. And the French leave him in jail, and his official death date is April 7th, 1803. But when you read the autism records from the jailers, the accounts of the jailers who found him, and then as it's written in the autism or the autopsy, record, they didn't go in for a few days. So that's the official date of death is April 7th, 1803. But he probably died a few days before that because he'd been complaining that his cell was 0 degrees Celsius, so freezing. that he had fevers, that he had a stomach ache, that he's coughing up blood, and there were blood in his lungs and on his lips. When they found him, his head kind of resting on the chimney that had no wood in it in cold winter in the Fort de Joux, which is along the border of Switzerland. And so the French tried to kind of cover up what they do at first. They don't report his death until the end of April, when it just kind of leaks. Then the British get a hold of this, and they're at war constantly back and forth with France. So they love saying that the French killed this illustrious Black general. And then news gets to the United States, of course, to Saint-Domingue, and it just propels the revolution forward even more. So this is April 1803. What's known as the Congress of Archipiélago happens in May 1803, and that's when all the revolutionaries come together and decide to change their motto from liberty or death to independence or death.
Wow. Well, that's a very tragic story. Okay, we know that there seems to be, well, not that there seems to be, there was a kingdom created in the first half of the 19th century. How does that happen? Because I know of Henry killed Henry, right?
Yes. So King Henry, Henri Christophe, in 1811 creates the Kingdom of Haiti. And so what happens sort of in between 1804 and 1811 is that Dessalines becomes first the leader of independent Haiti, and then pretty quickly after that, Emperor of Haiti, Jacques I. But he's killed by members of his own military on October 17th, 1806, on the Pont Rouge, which is just outside of Port-au-Prince. And this leads to a splintering and fracturing of Haitian society because a man named Pétion, Alexandre Pétion, a fellow general from the Haitian Revolution, is the kind of head of this conspiracy. And Christophe, who had been the head of the Haitian army under Dessalines, knows this. And so even though he's named, Christophe is president of the newly baptized Republic of Haiti in December 1806, he's not really too happy with trusting the people who he believes are the assassins of Dessalines. And so he flees to the north after previously, briefly trying to take over Port-au-Prince, which is going to be kind of the new seat of the new nation as it is today. And he sets up a separate state in 1807. In the north, Pétion ends up ruling in the south. So at that moment in 1807, you have a state of Haiti in the north, and you have a republic of Haiti in the south. But in 1811, Christophe's counselors of state get together and decide that they would like him to take the title of king. They have all these reasons and that are quite complex to go into this, but it really has a lot to do with the contest between sort of monarchy and republicanism that's playing out globally. We saw it in the American Revolutionary War. We see it in the case of the French Revolution in France and the country bouncing back and forth between a republic and a monarchy. And in fact, that continues into the 19th century and will have dire consequences for King Henry's rule, because when Napoleon is forced to abdicate his throne the first time in 1814, the Bourbons come back to power. Here's another Louis the 18th becomes king. And what is one of the first things that Louis the 18th does? He sends a mission to try to prepare the groundwork to retake Saint-Domingue so they can reinstate slavery, with all these secret instructions that come to light. And of course, Napoleon escapes from his first exile on the island of Elba. He marches on Paris with about 1,000 men and retakes it. The Bourbons have to go into hiding. And so the 100 days period begins. And for a time, it seems like Haiti was maybe spared because of the 100 days period. And then after that, Louis XVIII comes back to power. And what does he do? Starts setting up another mission in 1816 to go to try to retake Saint-Domingue. And so the interesting thing that happens under King Henry's rule is that he is adamantly against any negotiations with, they say, we don't care if it's Napoleon, Bourbons, anybody, any French leader, French colonists, etc. We will not negotiate with the French unless they recognize our independence, free and clear. We're not paying them. We're not entering into any treaties that doesn't have that at the outset of it. And so he's kind of Haiti's biggest defender, whereas Pétion in the South is a little bit more open to how can we negotiate for recognition of our independence, including Pétion being the one who proposes an indemnity, although the French colonists had floated that idea, an indemnity being Haiti paying France to recognize its freedom, had been floated by the colonists earlier in 1804. But it's Pétion who kind of puts a dollar amount on it, a small dollar amount, albeit, and kind of breathes new life into the idea, even though it's actually not going to happen until 1825 under a subsequent Haitian president.
Well, that's a very weak stance, actually offering indemnization. From your book, one gets it's very obvious that the French are awfully stubborn people. They just keep coming back and try to do the worst. It's just how persistent they can be for things that are very bad. It's I don't know what to think of their present culture. I don't know anything about the French, but if you judge them by their past, these are very persistent, but for the wrong reasons. Something I want to mention that's very important. The beginning of the 19th century saw a lot of revolutions in Latin America. Simon Bolivar and all these important figures. That didn't necessarily meant a freedom, generalized freedom.
Yeah.
What it meant, in fact, was that instead of the seat of power being in La Península Ibérica in Spain, and instead of power being exercised by the Spaniards, it's going to be the white elite of Latin America. The people who are descendants of those Spaniards who are here, who are rich and powerful. That's essentially what happened. And these people essentially turned their backs on Haiti because, as you know, there was still slavery in other parts of America. So to recognize the independence of Haiti meant to give some sort of hope to other slaves in other places.
Yeah.
And that was adamantly opposed by people from these emerging Latin American countries, such as Colombia, Venezuela, Panama, all those countries that became independent in the first half of the 19th century from Spain. One of your theses in the book is, and in fact, I don't want to, this is the actual last line of your book. The Haitian Revolution did not fail the world. The world failed the Haitian Revolution. And I agree with you, but what are your arguments to say that? I agree with you. I just want you to elaborate more on that.
Well, I mean, so we can think about, again, one of those moments when the Haitian, because I'm letting them tell their story, right? So General Marion's son is going through his father's papers, and he's telling the story of Simon Bolivar. And even when he gets to the 1826 Congress of Panama, where Bolivar kind of betrays Haiti by excluding Haiti from the Congress at the United States' assistance. So that's just one of many betrayals, right? So there's a betrayal there and a failure there. You're failing the Haitian Revolution. And isn't it interesting that Marlene says, you can exclude us all you want, but there's still all these people who got their liberty because of our revolution. So therefore our revolution is going to be a success, right? And so the failure that I'm talking about is a sort of a more spiritual one. Yes, we could say it in many ways that the Haitian Revolution was one of the greatest successes in world history. But what I really meant with that last line was actually that when people look at Haiti today and they say the Haitian Revolution didn't succeed because look at the state of the Haitian people today and what liberties they don't have and what security they don't have and what prosperity they don't have. And I say, but that's because the world failed Haiti and the Haitian Revolution, because from the 1825 indemnity, from a world that sat around and laughed, essentially, because when Boyer agrees to this, 150 million francs to Charles X, Bourbon king, brother to Louis XVIII. So now we're away from the Louis for a moment. When the British say Haiti can't pay that money, everyone is astonished. But does anybody do anything No. So in a world that loves to intervene in Haiti, don't you find it interesting that in a moment where they could have intervened and said, no, that is not right. They should not have to pay you. And we're not going to suffer that they pay you. No one intervened. Yet they want to intervene for all the wrong reasons. They want to take over the Bay of Samana and what's now the Dominican Republic. They want to take over Mont Saint Nicolas. They want to gather Haitian territory on various outlying islands. They want to actually invade the island in 1915 in the name of Haitian security and in the name of forcing Haiti to continue to pay this unjust debt. Because what happens to the debt is that Louis Philippe, who's the cousin of Charles X, comes to power later. And in an 1838 revision that they really anachronistically call the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, reduces the overall amount that Haiti's going to have to pay to 90 million francs, but instead of 150 million, but forces them to take out all these draconian loans that would take decades to unveil where all the money went. Because we can trace, it was paid off in the 1880s and 1890s, and then this portion was paid off in 1947. But the opportunity cost, the loans they took out to pay the loans, all of that, the repackaging of all of that, to this day, we can't trace every last penny and cent and debt. And so that's what I mean when I say the world failed the Haitian Revolution, failed the principles of it, because Haiti was punished over and over again, and is still being punished. After the 2010 earthquake, when François Hollande went to Haiti, he stuck his foot in his mouth because he said, we owe a debt to Haiti. And then everybody said, oh, you're acknowledging the debt? And very quickly his spokespeople put out statements, no, we meant a moral debt. And it's always that Haiti can never be compensated for actual physical and material harms, whether that's cholera that happened after the 2010 earthquake, or the indemnity, which is the clearest case of reparations that perhaps exists, because there are receipts for the actual money and amount that Haiti paid. And the New York Times, one of the really great parts of their investigation, Ransom, was in actually showing the public those receipts, taking it out of the realm of an abstraction, reparations from slavery, and talking about repayment of an unjust debt, a falsely or an unjustly imposed debt, and taking that out of that realm of abstraction, which we can never quantify the harms of slavery. Maybe we can't ever quantify them, but we can quantify the amount that Haiti paid to France and all the benefits they got, including the Eiffel Tower that was financed with money from the indemnity. And so that's really what I meant with that, is that if we actually fold back and think about it, the Haitian Revolution did remarkable and wonderful things for the world, but the world did not do remarkable and wonderful things in the name of the Haitian Revolution, including segregation and apartheid in South Africa, all of these things that are antithetical to the Haitian Revolution and took way too long to eradicate. And we are still living with the legacies of all of that history today.
Okay. Centuries of slavery, atrocities, rebellion, blood spilled, people tortured, burned, their heads severed and put on stakes, the wheel, plagues, invasions, more blood spill. And once this nation finally gets emancipated and earns its freedom at a high cost, every country around it turned their backs. The Haitian government sent troops to Latin America to support the independent movements from Spain in Latin America. This is something that's not mentioned. And Simon Bolivar and other figures turned their backs on the Haitians as soon as they could. The nascent United States turned their backs on Haiti. Nobody traded with Haiti. Nobody wanted to do anything with Haiti. They just wanted to keep them isolated and as poor as possible because there was still slavery in other places. Great Britain, as you say, said something but didn't do anything about it. The French, after all those years and centuries of blood and torture and slavery, still had the cojones to tell to these people, okay, you're gonna pay us now an indemnization, which is stupid, and that's just me trying to not be blunt and saying worse words than that. And now we are in a situation where we have some Kenyan police, or is what's going on in Haiti now? Because what I want to illustrate is these people have never had a period of complete peace, of a period of complete of progress, even because of all the reasons we just stated. But what is the present state of Haiti?
Well, Haiti right now is in a state of crisis that is not completely divorced or unrelated to everything that we've been talking about here. Because you think, how could it be, right? One of the things I really wanted to show with the book was that we can say, why did King Henry make himself a king? Oh, that seems like a retrograde. That seems like not progress and going back. But when you look at what life was like in that kingdom, you see that Haiti was on a path, just as the United States was on a path. And if another actor had come into the United States at some point and said, no, you need to pay all your money and funds to Great Britain, and we're going to impose all these sanctions on you, they would have created a different path that the United States would have gone on. And we don't know what that path would have looked like. And that is in the King Henry chapters, which is, mostly in part 3 of the book. I wanted to point out that Haiti was on a path, and it was on a path that was looking pretty good in terms of they were trying to figure it out. They were making laws, instituting reforms, building schools, creating infrastructure, roads and hospitals, higher education, medicine, training doctors and nurses. They were trying to figure out what it was going to look like for them to exist in a world of slavery as a free nation. They were trying to figure that out. And then comes along the indemnity. And now, what does freedom mean again? Okay, to be free of France, we have to pay them this money. And how are we going to get this money? We take out loans on the one hand. Boyer institutes, as I talk about, the Code Rural, which is just worse than many of the laws under the previous administrations, because now it reclassifies all Haitian citizens essentially as laborers, all the non-elite, non-military so as laborers, basically saying that anybody can be subjected to, having to go to these farms and pay all this, give all these revenues to the state to pay the indemnity. The indemnity is 1825, Code Rural 1826, cause effect, right? And that changes the trajectory of this nation and puts it on the current path. I believe strongly that it is changed and I take my cue again from the 19th century Haitian intellectuals, Janvier, Firmin. They are saying, we live here and we lived through this and our parents lived through this and our grandparents, and they told us, Demisvar de l'homme, this is the moment when the bad thing that is now what we see as Haiti, which is worse than what was happening in the 19th century, in the late 19th century. After the American occupation is another moment where Haitians are muddling through, as many Latin American countries are, in a world of capitalism, in a world where the United States has become ascendant and dominant in their hemisphere, and they're trying to figure it out. And the United States comes along and occupies them for 19 years, trains a police force, installs a puppet presidency, and then will have a say in installing or deposing every single president from that moment on, from Philippe d'Artigonave on until now. Even now in Haiti, after the assassination of Jovenel Moïse, Haiti's president, in July 2021, the assassination, Ariel Henry was essentially put into office or paved the way for him to become the leader of Haiti, technically the prime minister or acting president, even though he'd never been sworn in. The man who'd named him to the office, Moïse, was dead and he hadn't been sworn in, and Moïse's presidency was under contestation. So now we're in a situation in Haiti in which people don't trust authority. They don't want an intervention, even though the security situation is as bad or worse than it's ever been, perhaps. People are suffering. People are starving. There are levels of violence that are unspeakable. And, friends and family in Haiti, everyone is devastated and afraid. principally in the capital, but around the country in terms of what is going to happen next. And the idea that the only answer is intervention is exactly what the UN, the United States, and neoliberal, sort of government agencies want, is a dependent Haiti that stays in its place and says, yes, master, to the Western world. Because Haiti's biggest crime in their eyes was saying no and standing up to fight for themselves.
Okay. I know that given your expertise and your astounding work with this book, it is a very powerful, formidable book. Given your expertise, I believe that you are actually in a position to do the following. What is your prescription for Haiti to get better, to start walking or making steps towards progress? And I think you're actually qualified to do that.
I mean, I don't know. I think that the solution will, I actually, have a lot of problems when people always, are saying Haitian-led solution, because that is true. The solution absolutely has to be Haitian-led, but the rest of the world has to get off the back of the Haitian people so they can stand up. We can't tell them, you have to pull yourself out of this quagmire while holding them down. And that's what's happening right now, because the UN and the United States, but the UN in particular, it would go a long way if they said, we no longer recognize as legitimate the government of Ariel Henry. Because as long as the United States and the UN in particular say that that's a legitimate government, they will create problems for anybody who wants to come after. Because there are many Haitian actors in civil society and leaders who are ready to help the country move forward, who have plans, extremely detailed plans. There was one that sort of fell apart because of no support from the international community, called the Montana Accord, in which the 400 members of different organizations came together and said, here's a person who could be acting president, here's a person who could be acting prime minister, here's how we can move forward. And the international community just poo-pooed in, because they don't trust the Haitian people to be able to chart their own path. But could it possibly, what they're proposing, be worse than the situation now, where people are afraid to leave their homes? They can't go to the bank or school or out for a meal or to the supermarket. I mean, this is not okay. People are there are women being raped. There are people being murdered, kidnapped. And the rest of the world is saying, oh, well, you said you didn't want an intervention. Like that's the only solution. Because what does intervention mean? Send a bunch of soldiers in there to start killing people? They say intervention and they don't say what they mean. Say what you mean. You mean you want to send soldiers in to kill people. Instead of, what if you took a tack that you've never taken before? They love interfering, right? Yet they won't say, we don't support this current administration in Haiti. It's not legitimate. It wasn't elected. There is literally no mandate for this man, Ariel Henry, to be in power. Even if people believed that Moise's term wasn't up because there was this debate about the Haitian constitutional calendar for the presidency, that his presidency wasn't up in February 2021, which led to wide-scale protests. By February 2022, it was a 1-year debate for the people who believed that the 5 years wasn't up, because he started late, but the calendar continues anyway, right? But to some people it didn't. The calendar was on pause. There's still no mandate for Ariel Henry to be in office. He says, I'll hold elections as soon as the security situation allows for it. That's circular, because there would be no security until he's no longer recognized. There's no way to move forward. For ordinary Haitian people and members of civil society who want to be leaders and who want to lead the country out of the current crisis.
Wow. Okay, so I think that the book right here, and I thank you for for sending me a copy of it. This is the book. It's out now. It's called The Awakening the Ashes, An Intellectual History of the Haitian Revolution. Where can we find this book?
You can find it at the University of North Carolina Press website, and I will send you a discount code, because you can get 40% off until I think November 30th or so. Plenty of time. And then also, if you want to support independent bookstores, you can go to bookshop.org. Of course, the book is available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all of those places as well. And I know people have lots of reasons for needing to shop at those places as well. So, any little bit helps to help further the knowledge of, as you say, the, most important revolution of this hemisphere.
Okay, so we can find it at those places. And do you have any conference, any other book, anything that you'd like to promote now?
Well, I'm working on just finishing up the final draft, in fact, of a biography on King Henri Christophe. There's a lot about him in Awakening the Ashes as well, but this is a biography and narrative history that should be coming out in 2025 with Knopf books, and will really kind of delve into his early life as an enslaved child on the island of Grenada, fighting in the American Revolutionary War at the Battle of Savannah, and then ending up a crucial part of the Haitian Revolution, and then the King of Haiti.
Okay, so what was the quote again that you mentioned earlier, that the only way to destroy colonialism was that quote again?
Oh, Fanon, who said, colonialism is unqualified violence, and it will only yield, is violence pure and simple. That's what he said, and it will only yield when confronted with greater violence.
Okay, violence is important, okay, but knowledge is important as well. And I believe that you are planting the seeds of something powerful with this book. And I believe that with this episode, we're contributing to whatever movement is going to be taking the reins or participating actively, not only in Haiti, but the diaspora, which is also very important, because I believe that Caribbean diasporas have a lot to contribute. Just because you're not in your motherland or in your country does not mean there's nothing you can do. You can get educated, you can have conversations, you can have debates, you can read Dr. Daut's book about the Haitian Revolution. And I believe that's also a way of doing something and actively contributing to Haiti's well-being today. Thank you very much for participating in this edition of Archipiélago Histórico, Dr. Daut.
Thank you so much for having me.
Has been a great episode, and I look forward to collaborating with you in the future. Let me know about that book that you're going to be publishing soon. I'd love to talk to you about it.
Oh, yeah.
And thank you again. This has been a new edition of Archipiélago Histórico. Until next time, hasta la próxima.